Hello and welcome to Gardening at 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you guys a tour of my tropical garden here. Now normally I don't do these tours until the end of the year, but there's a couple of reasons why I want to do it now in the middle of summer. Today is the 2nd of August, so I'd like to show you this around the middle of summer, whereas normally I do it around middle of September when it's at its biggest. But the reason I'm doing it this time, is because it's been one of the best growing seasons ever for me, and the bananas are pretty much as big as they've ever been, especially as big as they've ever been for this time of year. Normally they're not anywhere near this tall already, but also because we're going to have a really bad storm tomorrow with winds at 70 miles an hour, and I'm expecting most of these to be completely destroyed, or at least most of the leaves shredded. So that's why I'm doing it at this time of year. So this is the main tropical bed. But I'd like to take you to my front garden because I've got quite a few tropicals in the front garden this year. So this is my front garden. So I won't talk about any of the other plants like the dahlias and things like that, because I'll talk about them on a video that I've just dedicated for this garden. But I want to talk to you about the bananas I have here and some of the other tropical plants in the front garden. So normally my front garden, it tends to be more traditional, but this year I had a few spare bananas and I put them in the front as well, just to add a bit more interest. So I'll start with this one here. This is my largest banana. This is my only edible banana. So this one here is Musa acuminata grand nain, and this is the same as you'll get in the shops. So this is a Cavendish variety, and it's exactly the same variety as you'll find in the shops and the supermarkets that you eat the fruit from. So this one, as I say, it's not hardy, and I wasn't expecting it to do well in my climate. So the first summer I kept it in the conservatory, and it did quite well over the summer as I expected, as the conservatory was hot. Then it survived the winter surprisingly well in the conservatory. So my conservatory is very dark in the winter as it's northwest facing, and also it's very cool, it gets down to about 5 degrees Celsius. So I was expecting this to die and not survive, but it actually did okay. It didn't completely die, and it started to come back okay despite those cold temperatures. So that told me it was actually tolerant of colder temperatures than what it says online. Online this says 10 or 12 degrees is too cold for it, but I found it was able to survive close to freezing as long as it didn't go below freezing. So what I did then is the next summer I planted it just behind me here in my whiskey barrel, because this is a really sunny position, south-facing garden. It's got a wall, it reflects the heat as well, and it did really well over the summer, even in some of the cooler months. And our temperatures don't often go above 20 degrees Celsius in the summer, so I wasn't expecting it to do well, but it grew really surprisingly well for me in the first summer. So then this year I overwintered it again in the conservatory. It looked like it was almost dying, and then I planted it out, and as you can see, it's a lovely big size now. What's really happened nicely in this year is that the babies have come up huge. You can see how big the leaves are on the babies. Now the main plant is a little bit smaller, the leaves, because it's struggling. It's because it lost a few of its leaves in early spring because of the wind, and they were damaged, so it didn't have as much space for it to photosynthesize with, and so it had a slower head start, and so it's just finally getting a good size of leaf now, and it's about to take off and grow really fast now that it's got some decent leaf coverage to get some photosynthesis. But the problem is, as I say, we're going to get this storm soon to rip all these leaves off, so I don't think this is going to be particularly large by the end of summer. But at least the younger ones underneath, they'll be a bit more sheltered. I've got a hedge around about this height just to the side of me. That should shelter these smaller plants, and these should hopefully survive, even if this larger one doesn't. But I'm really happy with how it's doing. And lovely looking banana. You've got these really nice kind of burgundy stripes, a bit like some of the sikkimensis bananas. So I'm really happy with how it's done, and it's going to clump up and get bigger every year, but I'll always have to dig it out because it's not root hardy to frost. It's only really cold tolerant. It's not truly frost tolerant. So over here I have a Musa sikkimensis. So this is frost hardy, and I grew a load of sikkimensis from seed a few years ago, about 4 years ago now. And they're all slightly different, and I'll talk about all the differences in the back garden where they're all next to each other. But this sikkimensis here I just had as a spare division. Basically my bananas almost died a couple of winters ago, and they're really struggling in spring. So what I did is I took some of the baby pups and I kept them inside over winter. Because last summer the main plants were so small, I was a bit worried that they weren't going to survive the winter and didn't have enough root system to survive. So I took out a few of the smaller pups to try and keep them inside, so even if I lost my main plants in the garden, the ones in the pot would survive and I could plant them out. So this is one of those that survived over the winter in the conservatory, and I planted it out. And although it lost a bit of leaves in the spring, and it was looking pretty bad in springtime, it's really come back now really nicely, and it's got some really lovely big leaves, and it's got a little pup coming up from the base as well. So looking really good. Hopefully it won't get too shredded in the winds. We'll just have to see how it does. Now I also have some Ensetes. We've got quite a large Ensete banana here, but I'll move the camera now and show you my largest Ensete banana and show you my Ensetes in a bit more detail. So this is my largest Ensete at the moment. I have grown green ones previously which grew even larger than this, but at the moment I've only got the Ensete ventricosum Maurelii, which is this variety here with the lovely burgundy leaves. So what happened about 3 or 4 years ago, I made a video on YouTube about how to propagate them. What you basically do is you cut off the growing point and then you have hundreds of new little shoots coming up from the corm, and then you can divide them and make lots of new plants. So Ensetes are quite different to the Musas. The Musas are like the normal bananas, they're the rest of my bananas. The Ensetes are quite different, although they do look like bananas superficially. So the way they grow is they grow most of the height in their leaves. Their stems are very short, as you can see here, it's not got much stem at all, but the stems are really fat and very wide, whereas the bananas in the Musa genus, they tend to be lots taller, and a lot of the height is from the stem, not from the leaves themselves. And another big difference is the bananas in the Musa genus, they're always sending up little pups, little babies from the root system, and so you can propagate them really easily. Whereas the Ensete bananas, they don't have pups at all, they just stay as one single plant until they flower and then they die. So you need to either collect the seeds, which isn't a viable thing to do in my climate because this can grow to about 5 or 6 meters in height and it needs several years growing outside in a tropical climate to flower, or you can force it to division, which is what I did. So I ended up with about 50 or 100 plants. I've kind of been giving them away as time goes by, and I've probably got about 20 left, but they're much bigger now as they've had several years to grow. But this is my biggest one anyway. It's looking really nice at the moment. It's got this lovely, really dark burgundy color underneath. You can see on the leaves there. It's then got a bit of green and then more burgundy on the edge. The other one that I used to have, which was the large form, which was a green variety, had lovely red stripes. It looked almost like crab sticks underneath on the midrib, and then the rest of the leaves were green, but that was actually an even larger growing variety than this, and that grew a lot faster. So I've got several of these around the garden. I've got one just behind you on the camera, exactly the same setup, so it's just mirroring in the garden. I've got the lobelia underneath, the Ensete bananas either side of the door to give a nice kind of symmetrical appearance, and then I've got another one in a pot just behind you as well, a bit smaller than this one. And then there's numerous other ones dotted around the garden in the tropical bed as well, and one in the front border. Basically, because I've had so many of them, I've just dotted them around wherever I've got spaces. And they grow really fast. So I'll show you some photos back in, I think it was May, when I planted this up originally. And you can see it's now the beginning of August and how much this has grown. It's really incredible how fast the Ensetes grow. I do find they grow quite a bit faster than the bananas. But unlike most of my bananas, which are root hardy, this isn't hardy at all. So it will tolerate temperatures down to around freezing, and it does surprisingly well with cool temperatures. I do find it does better with cool temperatures than most of my bananas do. This comes from the Ethiopian highlands, where they get touches of frost every now and again, and temperatures are always quite cool throughout the year. So although it's in the tropics, it's very high altitude, and so they don't mind the colder temperatures, and there's also a lot of cloud cover and rainfall up there as well. So it's very similar to what a Scottish climate is in the summer. So this is why I think it does so well for me. But as I say, it doesn't tolerate frost, and the main stem is what you need to keep. So it doesn't have a corm like a big tuber like the bananas. Most of the mass is in the stem. There is a corm, but it's a lot smaller than a banana corm. So what I need to do with this is I need to take it into conservatory, and the smaller plants I keep as a plant in a pot. Whereas these bigger ones, once they get too big to keep in a pot, what I do is I cut the leaves off, cut the roots off, and I just keep the main trunk, and then I just leave it to dry out a little bit. It doesn't fully dry out because the trunk is absolutely full of water, and that's how it supports itself. It's basically got lots of little divisions within the stem, and it's all full of water, and that's what gives it the strength. So I just let it dry out a little bit, and then come springtime, I just put it back in some soil, and it takes off again. So that's the Ensete bananas. Beautiful bananas, they're quite common as well. You can get them in a lot of the shops in the UK. So now I'll show you another plant that I've got here in my front garden, and that's my Brugmansia. So this here is my Brugmansia. So it's got these lovely big trumpet flowers. Unfortunately, it tends to flower more in the evening, so there's not much to show at the moment. It's just kind of in between flowering. We've got one just down there, which is just going over. But it's a beautiful looking plant. It's a very poisonous plant as well, so I try not to touch this unless I'm wearing gloves. But it's been doing all right for me. Last year I had it in the ground in my tropical bed, but I think it had such a good amount of feed and such a good root system that it grew too fast. It got really lost, just loads of leaves, barely flowered at all for me last summer. And then we had some strong winds and it lost most of its branches and they got snapped off. And that's why it's got this kind of weird appearance of having 3 or 4 trunks is because a lot of the main branches were snapped and it's kind of reshooted up from the base. So this year I've had it in the pot to make sure it's a bit more constricted, and it's made a massive difference to how it grows. So last year it had massive leaves, probably about 1 foot in length. This year the leaves have all been quite small and it hasn't put on a lot of stem growth, whereas last summer it put on huge amounts of stem growth but never flowered, or very rarely flowered. Whereas this year, apart from right now, it's actually been covered in flowers the whole summer and been looking really, really good. So it overflowered a bit too much and it kind of went a bit weak, lost most of its leaves. It just had nothing but flowers basically, didn't put any energy into leaves. So it's kind of in a rest at the moment. It's putting on a few new leaves and then it'll start flowering again for me in a few weeks. So it seems to do much better in a small pot. So I'll probably keep it in a pot from now on. I'm probably might try and make the pot a little bit larger. I saw these when I was younger in Hanover, in some gardens there, and they have some amazing specimens in tiny pots, but they're massive trees, and because they're in those small pots and they're big trees, they're basically forced into flowering and they don't put on much growth, and they look absolutely stunning. And that's really what I want to get mine like eventually. I'll be limited to how big I can get it because it isn't hardy, and I have to take this inside into my conservatory in the winter time, and it loses all its leaves. It goes deciduous basically, and I just keep it mostly dry and in a dormant state over winter, and just keep it frost free. It can handle low temperatures but not freezing, and then I take it out in spring and it goes away fine for me and does really well even in my slightly cooler summers. So I'm really happy with it. Not looking the best at the moment, probably needs a prune as well because it's looking a bit messy. Ideally what I want to do is go for that one that I saw in Hanover, and I want to have a big long clear stem and just have a massive canopy above. The reason I like it high with a big canopy above is because the trumpet flowers always hang down, or especially in my variety they do, and so you can't really see them when you're above them, so it's great to have them above you, then you can look up and you can get the full display. So that's all the tropical plants I have in the front garden. The only other ones I have really are my elephant foot vine, which I'll do a separate video on, and my jade plant as well, but they're just summer visited, they're not planted in the ground. So now I'll take you to the back garden, and that's my main tropical bed, and that's where the vast majority of my tropical plants are grown year round. So here we're back in the tropical bed. First of all, I'd like to show you all my banana plants. So I'll go through them individually and tell you about the different aspects of them all. So I've got 3 types of bananas here. I've got the Ensete ventricosum that I showed you in the front garden. I've got the Musa sikkimensis, and I've got Musa basjoo as well. So I'll first of all talk about the Musa sikkimensis. That's my favourite one. It's the most interesting as well because I've got 3 different varieties that I've grown from seed. So Musa sikkimensis are all the ones you can see here at the front. So basically, as I said before, I grew these from seed about 4 years ago, and they all grew in slightly different characteristics. And so I've got 3 different varieties now that I've grown from seed, and they're all kind of unique and different. So I'll show you all the different aspects of them. So I'll start off with this one at the front down here. Now Musa sikkimensis is a hardy banana, and so at the root level there has a corm that as long as you keep it mulched it'll survive the winter no problem, even if you have hard frosts above. I've had -15 and prolonged frosts, and as long as it's mulched and doesn't get frozen, the roots underground are absolutely fine. So Musa sikkimensis is a little bit different to Musa basjoo, which most people grow. That's the hardy one, that's the hardiest banana. I think it's a slightly nicer banana because the leaves are nice and firm, they're not too floppy, and they're quite strong as well and good resistant against the wind. And you often get some nicer features and colours on the Musa sikkimensis than you do on the Musa basjoo. So this Musa sikkimensis here, this is one that says I've grown from seed. This one differs from the other ones in that it has a nice kind of bronze colour to the back of the leaf, so you can see there, that looks quite nice. And it's got a fairly thin stem, this one, but it also comes with some nice like bloom, which is like a kind of like a waxy colouring that you get to the stem here. It's a waxy covering that gives it kind of like bluey turquoise appearance to it. So that's quite nice. Some of my other ones don't have that. So this is one of them. The other variety is the one I had in the front garden. It's that one back here. This, as you see from behind, it doesn't tend to have much of a purpling underneath. It does have a little bit, but it's a lot less pronounced. Also, the leaves tend to be quite floppy on this one, so I'm not as keen on this one. Again, the stems are relatively thin, but when I say thin, they're just the same as my Musa basjoo, but they're a lot thinner than one of my other Musa sikkimensis. So this one has, say, floppier leaves, but the leaves tend to be a little bit bigger on this one. Also, the leaves, where they come away from the stem, there's quite a large separation, whereas this one, they tend to be a little bit closer to the stem. Now, talking of closer to the stem, this is my favourite banana, and the leaves are much closer to the stem. As you can see, where they separate from the main stem, there's only a tiny little bit of petiole there, a little bit of length of a leaf stem. So this is my favourite Musa sikkimensis so far. So as you can see, this one also retains some of that nice striping, and this is something that you get on a lot of sikkimensis plants, but tends to be when they're younger. When they get older, they tend to lose that and it just goes to the plain green. But this one keeps it even to quite a mature stage, so that's a really nice feature to have. Now there are a few different varieties out there that you can get a Musa sikkimensis that also keep their stripes for a later stage. But I think this one's a bit more interesting because there's a couple of other interesting attributes that this plant has that I think is nicer, or I find is either more appealing to the eye or is more useful for my climate. And that is, one is the leaves are incredibly thick. So filling the leaves on this and filling the leaves on these ones, the leaves feel much thicker and much tougher, and they don't tend to get battered about in the wind as badly. Also, the leaves are much wider. You can see here, the leaves tend to be quite long and thin. They're much longer than they are wide. Whereas these ones, although they are longer than they are wide, they're not by a huge margin. So they are incredibly wide leaves considering the length of them, so I think that's quite a nice feature to have. Also, with having that shorter petiole there, it means that it's a little bit more wind resistant. I find that the leaves don't snap off at the stem quite as often as they do with my other Musa sikkimensis, and also the trunk on this is quite a lot thicker than my other Musa sikkimensis. So for the size of it, it's got a very thick trunk, and that gives it a lot more strength as well. So they're all the different things that I think really add to this one of interest. It does also have a little bit of the purpling underneath, but it's not as prominent as this one here. So all in all, I think this is my favourite Musa sikkimensis that I've got, and it does seem to be reliably hardy as well. So really happy with this one. This one was originally grown in my parents' garden, which was an incredibly windy site, and it's always stood up to the wind relatively well in that position. Last year, it got a bit damaged by the frost, and I was a bit worried that it might lose if we had another really hard winter. So what I did is I separated one of the little babies, one of the pups, and this is the one that I had separated, grew it over the winter in my conservatory, and I planted it in the ground now. The reason I didn't put it straight in the ground last year is because when they're very young, the Musa sikkimensis and any bananas, if they're quite small and they lose the top half in the frost, they're not going to survive through the winter as well. So that's why I've kept this one here. So that's all my Musa sikkimensis plants. Now I'll show you my Musa basjoo and how that's doing. So this here is my Musa basjoo. This is the hardest out of all my bananas. It's probably the most common one as well. The other ones are unique to me because I've grown them from seed. This was just bought from a shop a few years ago, and it's the one that most people know quite well. It's Musa basjoo. It's a very hardy banana. It's definitely hardier than the other ones. I've had this survive just with mulching the stems with dead plant material and not having it in my special insulation chambers. So it's definitely hardier than the Musa sikkimensis, but I find it tends to have thinner stems, or at least thinner stems than my favourite Musa sikkimensis. And also the leaves are a lot floppier, so I don't like the appearance quite as much. And I find the leaves do get shredded a little bit more easily as well. But otherwise, it's still a great banana. And this has the most potential for me to get to the biggest size because of it's better suited to the winters here. But I do find that growth-wise, I find the Musa sikkimensis actually grow faster. So at the moment, they're about the same height, but this had a big head start this year because it had more of the stem surviving, so the stem was higher to begin with. But by the end of summer, I will imagine that my Musa sikkimensis will be higher than my Musa basjoo. And I do find towards the end of the season, when the Musa basjoo starts to slow down, the Musa sikkimensis keeps growing at a slightly faster rate. So the sikkimensis seems to do better with cool temperatures in the summer, whereas the Musa basjoo seems to do better with the colder winter temperatures. So a bit of a trade-off there, but I definitely find that the Musa sikkimensis is the better banana for me, as long as I can keep those stems insulated enough to survive the winter. So this one's done quite well for me this year. It had a really big stem in its second year a few years ago, and it probably got about this kind of height, higher than this one is now. That main stem died off one winter. Last year it sent up lots of new shoots. You can see there's quite a few coming up here. I think I had about 4 come up last year. These ones survived the winter luckily, so that's why they're at a decent height now. But it's sending up a lot more as well. And I do find that the Musa basjoo sends up babies all the time. It's constantly sending up pups. Whereas I find that my Musa sikkimensis, they only send about 3 or 4 pups per plant per year. Whereas the Musa basjoo seems to send up almost 10 per year. It's absolutely throwing lots of little babies out all the time. That's Musa basjoo. You do get a little bit of colouring underneath, but generally it is normally green underneath. A great banana, but as I say, not my favourite when it comes to all my bananas, but the biggest clump I have at the moment, and definitely the hardiest as well. So I've also got lots of Ensetes in this bed as well. You can see there's one just kind of in the corner down here. I won't really mention them as I mentioned them in the front garden, but I've got 4 of them in here at the moment. I just placed them just in places to fill up where there's a gap. Basically the rest of the bed stays planted all year round. And then the Ensetes and my tree Dahlia gets planted in the spring. The rest of it stays in the ground and I just insulate the whole lot. So I'll now show you my tree dahlia. So this here is my tree dahlia. This is Dahlia imperialis. I've never had it flower for me, but what it does in the wild is it will grow really tall, up to about 8 meters in height, and then you'll get flowers right at the end of the season, November, December time. But here in North Scotland, it gets so cool by that time of year, the growth really slows down, and then the frost comes before it can flower for me. But it does grow tall. I've had it probably to about 3 meters before. This year it's a good height, but it's really congested. There's lots of shoots. Other years I've just had it as one main shoot. So I'll give you a bit of history about these two plants. There's two here at the moment that have been planted. Basically, the last couple of years I've had them grafted with other dahlias on top, and I've just been experimenting with dahlia grafting. And I've been trying to keep the grafts going for a couple of years, but dahlias, they like to grow up in the summer, and then they die back and they go dormant into the tubers in the winter, or in the dry season where they come from. So the problem is, it's quite hard to keep their foliage year round, from one year into the next. So I was finding that I was managing to do that for a couple of years, but last year I think maybe the conservatory was just too cold, or maybe I didn't keep them well watered enough, and they ended up dying off. So anyway, these are the root systems that have come back. So the grafts are gone, but this is the root systems that have come back from them. And you can see they've really got a lot of vigor. They were big, strong, vigorous plants last year, so they had a really big tubers come springtime, and so they've really been able to come up quite quickly this year. So they're doing well at the moment. I do find when they're kind of crowded together, they grow much taller. So with these plants, I find they really make massive changes in their growth habit depending on the light levels. So you can see this one here, for example, a little bit more crowded. It's got about 20 centimeters between the internodes, and I find these can go up to a foot or a foot and a half in between the internodes when they're really in quite a shady location. And then when they're in full sun, such as this one at the top, you can see the internodes really shrink down to just 1 or 2 centimeters. So in the past, when I've grown them as single individual stems, they tend to just grow 2 or 3 centimeters in between the leaves, and they stay quite short. But this year, because there's loads of stems fighting it out between each other for light, they're really kind of having to stretch, and that's making them grow much taller, much quicker. So that's an interesting observation to see. So this might get the tallest I've had yet. Maybe it'll get to 4 meters this year. I'm not sure. We'll just see what happens with the storm, but hopefully this will be sheltered enough. It is kind of between my bamboo here and my bananas, so it's a bit of a more sheltered position. Now we'll see how it does. I'm not expecting any flowers to come off it, because to be honest, we'd have to have a really long warm autumn for that to happen. But I just like the rapid growth of the foliage, and the fact you can do from just a small shoot in the ground in late spring right up to 3 or 4 meters in one growing season. So I almost forgot, I do have one new addition to the bed, and that is this plant here. This is Musa sikkimensis, and the variety is Ever Red. It's quite a recent variety, but the shops seem to be trying to sell it everywhere. I've seen it in Tesco, I've seen it on online stores as well, so it seems to be very widely available now, even up here in North Scotland, where we don't tend to have as many tropical plants for sale in our local stores. This one was on sale, so I got it. Be interesting to see how it does. It's supposed to keep that red colour much better than some of the other Musa sikkimensis right into maturity. But I do find that on this one anyway, the leaves are quite floppy and quite thin. It's almost more like a Musa basjoo than a Musa sikkimensis, but we'll see. It's a very young plant. It maybe doesn't have its mature characteristics yet, but I still must prefer my variety, which has much thicker leaves. These, as I say, are a bit floppy and a bit thin, whereas my one has much thicker leaves. Even when it's a young, small plant, I find my leaves on my variety are much thicker, whereas this young plant's got very thin leaves. But we'll see how it does. It's very young, early days. Hopefully it will size up enough before the winter, then it'll be able to survive the winter, and then we'll see how it does next year. So the next plants I'd like to show you are my Hedychiums. So these are a little bit trickier to show because they're undergrowth plants, so I'm going to have to crouch down underneath all these bananas to really show you them. But we've got a few different ones. I've got 3 different ones anyway. So the one I have here is Hedychium wardii. I have this in 3 different locations in this bed. There's this original clump here, and there's one right at the back as well. This is probably my favorite Hedychium, or the one that Hedychium, the one that grows the best for me anyway. So this one varies quite a lot from the other 2 varieties. This one has much thicker stems, so I find it's much more wind resistant. I also find that it seems to grow quite well in my climate and flower, whereas the other ones really don't tend to flower very well for me. You can see this is the flower shoot coming up in this one here. The flowers I also find much more interesting, that they look more like orchid flowers, and they're yellow, bright yellow, and they have an amazing scent. Whereas I find my other Hedychiums, the flowers don't have such a strong scent. And the great thing with this one is The flowers come out of this big shoot here, but the flowers are staggered, so they come out for probably about a whole month or something. Once this comes up and starts flowering, you've got a whole month of flowering until it completely finishes, and then this stem will never flower again. You'll have to get flowers if you want more flowers to come up from another stem. Whereas my other hedychiums, I find they have a big flower head that comes out with loads of flowers. They only last about a week or two, and that's the flowering done for that stem until another flowering stem comes up. So this one gives me a much longer flowering season. Also, this one, as you can see, is already coming into flower now at the beginning of August, whereas my other ones won't even show any signs of flowering until September. It's not normally until October I get any flowers, and a lot of years I don't get any flowers at all because they just take so long to grow. So the other thing that's nice with this one, as well as having thicker stems, the leaves are much bigger, they're much wider leaves, much more interesting looking, and I find it seems to grow better in my climate. This clump has been getting bigger and bigger as the year's gone on, and I've divided it and put it around several places in my garden. Whereas my other hedychiums, I tend to find they don't really size up very well, and they're not much bigger every year. Each year they do get slightly larger, but the increase of size is quite minimal, so you don't really have a lot to then divide and spread around the garden. So anyway, that's the Hedychium wardii, probably my favourite one. Now I've got another one down the front here. So this one here is Hedychium gardnerianum. The one disadvantage actually with the wardii is it has its rhizomes right at the surface of the ground, so I find it's much more difficult to overwinter. Because they're right on the surface, they tend to get frosted a lot more easily, whereas my other hedychiums, they tend to have their rhizomes 5 centimeters under the ground, so they tend to survive much better the frosts. This one, the Hedychium wardii, I do plant it deep as I can every year, so sometimes I dig it up and replant it deeper, but then it always puts its rhizomes back up on the top because that's just where it likes to grow. So this one's nice as well, nice flowers, and I'll show you my other one, which is Telstar 4, which is kind of hiding back in the corner. So I've really had to get down in the undergrowth for this one. This is my original hedychium that I got in the first year that I had my tropical garden, and this is the variety called Telstar 4. I believe it's a hybrid hedychium. I do find it grows a bit better for me than the gardnerianum. It doesn't grow quite as well as the wardii, but you can see it's quite different to the wardii. It's much more like the gardnerianum. It's got the thin stems, long thin leaves, and this one's doing particularly well this year. I think because it's a little bit more shady by the bananas. So these naturally grow more as understory plants in the wild. They do like a decent amount of light, so that I wouldn't put them in deep shade, but they don't like to be baked in the sun all day like bananas do. So this one's doing well. I've got 2 shoots here, and we've got a third one over here, although it is swamped at the moment by a runner bean that I actually planted last summer, but because it had so much mulch to protect all the roots from my tropicals, that the root system of the runner bean has survived. And runner beans are actually perennial where they come from in the wild, so if the roots don't get frost, they will actually come back the next year. So I'm just letting that grow. Hopefully it doesn't kill off my plant. I don't think it will, but that'll just be an extra harvest of beans for me anyway. And in the back, I've also got another Hedychium wardii, and that's that one just popping up there. So whilst I'm down here in the undergrowth, I'd like to also show you some of my under planting that I put in here to kind of fill out the ground level and give it kind of a covering of the soil eventually, so that we can keep away the weeds and have it more like a jungle theme. What I want to do is with my jungle, make it quite realistic, where it would be like it would in the wild, where you have canopy plants like the bananas, mid canopy like the hedychiums, and then you have like the ground cover. So dotted throughout the whole bed, I've got several hardy begonias. So this is Begonia grandis, and the other ones I have are also Begonia grandis, but just varieties of it. This one here is Begonia grandis Sapporo, which is supposed to be the most hardy variety. It has these lovely kind of dark burgundy leaves underneath. Leaves don't get particularly large. The whole plant will probably grow about 2 foot in height eventually, and it has small pink flowers in the autumn. But it's quite late when it flowers and it's not that showy. I just like it because the fact that you can get a hardy begonia, when you think of begonias, you always think of them as something that isn't hardy. So I just love the novelty that it is hardy. And these don't actually need any protection. I've had these outside in pots around -15, and I've had them survive -15 uninsulated. So they are truly hardy at the root level. They have these little tubers and they're fully hardy. Also, what they do at the end of autumn, so they're not in any forming at the moment, but right at the end of autumn, they have little bulbules which appear in between the leaves and the stems, and then you can then propagate them around the garden using that. I do find the bulbules don't tend to self-seed very well for me. I have maybe 1 or 2 that have self-seeded in total. Even though they produce hundreds every year, they don't seem to survive the winter. but it does mean I can easily propagate them if I want to in the future and spread them around the garden. And that's how I got these originally, actually. I just bought them as tiny little bulbules in the post. So there's probably about 5 or 6 of these clumps around this part of the garden, and I'll probably increase it in the future. I think this one here actually might have been one of the self-seeded ones from the little bulbules, and you can see I've got another one back here as well. So I've also got a couple of other different hardy begonias. We got this one here, which is a grandis as well, the Begonia grandis, but this variety, instead of being Sapporo, it's Nanjing silver. So it's not showing it that well this year, but you can see underneath some of these older leaves have got these lovely silver specks on them. You see that one there's a bit more prominent. So that's the difference basically with this one. Is I think it's maybe slightly less hardy. I'm not sure yet. I haven't fully tested the hardiness out on it, but it certainly survived last year mulched underground with no problems. But yeah, it's got slightly paler leaves. The underside isn't quite as dark, but it's pretty similar, and it should grow in a similar manner. Although I do see this one has a flower bud coming, which seems a little bit early, so maybe it also flowers earlier than my Sapporo, but I'm not too sure. I've only had this for one or two seasons, so I'm not entirely sure on its growing structure. And this here is my favourite one. And look, unfortunately, I think the slugs have eaten off some of the stems, and this one's dying off now. But you can see some of the leaves are still surviving. This is the Begonia grandis hybrid, and this is known as Begonia Torsa. The leaves on this get absolutely huge. So this actually had leaves about this kind of size in spring. You can see that's the bit of left of one of them. Unfortunately, the strong winds and the cold temperatures and strong light levels damaged this one. I didn't spend enough time hardening it off, so it got frazzled by the sun and the wind and the cold weather conditions. So it lost most of its original leaves. It is regrowing them now, but they're much smaller. So as I say, they can get really, really big. So it looks really quite impressive. I've not tested the hardiness yet on this one, but I will be testing it this winter to see how it does. I'm not expecting it to be as hardy as the other straight up grandis species, because it is hybridized with one that's probably less hardy, but we'll see how it does. It is supposed to be hardy, so hopefully it will survive. And I'll be mulching this whole part of the bed anyway, because it's near my bananas, so I'm sure it will survive underneath the mulch. So what's good about this one is it gets much bigger, huge leaves, but the leaves are quite interesting underneath as well. So they're mostly green, but the veins are a lovely dark colour, really, really dark, you can see there. So that's quite an interesting feature. And that produces bulbules as well, and I've got a few growing inside. So if this one does die this winter, I know that the rest of them will be absolutely fine. So that's all my begonias, quite a few dotted around. I'll now show you some other plants which kind of fit in with the ground cover theme as well. So I've had to get right down in the undergrowth to show you guys this plant. This here is my Oxalis triangularis. This here is normally known as a house plant, but because it has these corms, you can grow them outside in colder climates because it does go into seasonal dormancy. And as long as it doesn't get too wet in the winter, and as long as it's buried deep enough underground, it will grow just fine and it will be like a hardy plant. So this has done really well for me this year. In previous years, it's always got oxalis rust, and what that causes is you get these kind of rusty patterns all over. I don't think there's any to show this year, which is great, because once it appears, the whole thing gets it, and then all the leaves die off. And then around about July time, you lose all the leaves and it doesn't really grow again for the rest of the year. So it's great to see that that hasn't happened this year, and it's looking a lot better for it. And it's actually putting on a good show of flowers as well, because often for me this dies off before the flowers come because of the oxalis rust. So really happy it's doing so well. I've got 3 or 4 of these planted in the undergrowth, and they just seem to do really nicely here at the base of the garden. And I find that it's quite adaptable. You can grow it in full sun, and it has this really dark purpley leaf. If you grow it in deep shade, it also grows okay, not quite as fast. It doesn't tend to bulk up as quickly, but it has a bit more of a greeny purple. It doesn't have that amazing dark purple colour. And because these are clumped up so much, if I wanted to, I could easily spread this throughout the whole bed, because the bulbs will separate so easily. I'll probably have 30 or 50 little corms from this one patch that I could spread throughout the whole bed if I want. And I might do that a little bit this year, just get it to grow in more areas, and I might maybe make a ring of it around the edge of the bed. So if you are interested in propagating this, I have actually made a whole video separately about that. I've also got a couple more Begonia grandis Sapporo just either side of it there as well. So another ground cover plant I put in, which isn't actually a tropical, but it just kind of looks tropical, is this Houttuynia here. Ignore the weeds, I haven't had a chance to weed yet, but you can see the Houttuynia here has got some fantastic colour on it. It kind of looks tropical, to my eye anyway, but it isn't. It just kind of sends out these creeping runners, and it has kind of spread quite nicely. So I'm just going to let this spread here and there in the bed and just pull it out from areas that I don't want it. It will grow a little bit taller, so it's not a true ground hugging plant, but it does, as I say, sucker quite well and will spread and cover a large area. So it has this fantastic colouring, this variety anyway, and it has more of these kind of red colours if you get some more light on it. So I keep it at the front here. So although it's a ground cover, it's right at the edge of the bed, so it does get a lot of direct sunlight. But it does do okay with a little bit of dapple shade as well, just not deep shade. And it has these small white flowers, not much to really write home about, but it's the leaves that really put on a fantastic display. And also in autumn, puts on quite a nice display when it starts to go red. So that's looking quite nice. It can be a bit invasive though. The roots, I find, because they do spread out, if you have an area that's difficult to weed with lots of other plants around, this isn't always the best plant. Or if you've got something like patio and you don't want it to go in between the paving slabs, then I would avoid it, as it does have creeping roots. And then finally, my last ground cover plant, although it's not really like an understory plant because it does like full sunlight, is my Alstroemeria here. I think it's also known as Peruvian lily. This is a really nice Alstroemeria. Some of the older varieties are much taller. They only kind of flower once in the season, and they've got very invasive root systems, and once they're in your garden, they're hard to eradicate. This one though, it stays really short. This is about as high as it will ever grow in the growing season, and it flowers pretty much constantly. So the way it works is it sends up individual shoots. At the top of the individual shoots, once it's finished forming the leaves, it has lots of flowers. And then it'll just keep sending up more shoots throughout the whole summer. The older shoots will kind of flop over and fall down with the heavier seed heads. I do find it does seem to set a lot of seed heads, but I've never had it self-seed anywhere, so it's never been a problem or invasive in my garden. And it'll just flower the whole season long. So this is always absolutely covered in flowers, really stunning looking. And because of how the lilies look, I think it kind of gives a tropical vibe to the garden. It isn't tropical, it's fully hardy, so really easy to grow, as long as I have it in a nice sunny position. So I'm really happy with this. So that's all the ground cover anyway. The only other thing really to mention in this area is my Shoofly plant here. So the last year I had loads of these in the garden because my bananas weren't doing so well and I needed to fill up the space with something. So I put lots of Shooflies in, but what that did is it actually smothered my bananas and the bananas didn't do so well for it. So this year I only let one grow. I quite like it. Basically, it just randomly appeared in my parents' garden about 20 years ago, and I've collected the seeds ever since and just propagated it ever since then. The seeds can kind of get blown around with the seed head, so that's why it probably just appeared out of nowhere. And it has these lovely flowers. Unfortunately, it's not open right now. They only last about a day, and they only open when it's sunny, and we just had a rain shower, so this one's closed up. But the flowers look quite nice, but it's more just for the kind of weird and tropical appearance I like to grow it for. And it's very fast growing. It is an annual. It's not hardy, so it'll die back with the frost, but the seeds are fully frost resistant, so they do come back, even though it is a subtropical plant. And if you do grow this in your garden, just be careful because it self-seeds like crazy, and if you don't want to be always weeding it out, I would avoid it. But it's a great looking plant, and if you live in somewhere like Scotland where it doesn't self-seed that well because the climate's a bit too cold for it, then it might be a really good plant to have in a tropical style bed. So I'll give you also an update on my Trachycarpus here. So this is my Trachycarpus fortunei. In the previous update, I mentioned how the middle of the growing point seemed to have died and the new leaves were just pulling out. It does take quite a lot of winters for me. I find that I'm just on the kind of too colder side for Trachycarpus fortunei. Maybe if there's a bigger, mature palm, it might survive, but I'm right on the borderline for it. -15 is a bit cold for it. But this year, the growing point, although it often pulls out every year, it normally comes back quite quickly. This year it was taking a long time. It was around June or July before I really noticed anything coming through. So I thought it might have died, but it's been fine. So we've got one new leaf already and a second one on the way. So that's really good to see. So it hasn't died. It's doing okay, but I think with it being set back every year by the growing point dying, unless I try and somehow kind of insulate it, I think it's always going to stay like a really small dwarf palm, and it's never going to get up to the true size that it can get up to. So with that, anyway, that's the Trachycarpus palm. Not looking the best, but at least it's alive, and it should grow well for the next couple of months until we get to the winter time. So I'd also like to show you the calla lily here. So the calla lily's done quite well. I did actually have lots of flowers this year, and normally it doesn't really flower till the end of the season, so I was really surprised to have flowering in July, and it looked quite nice. But the flowers are finished now, and it's just back to leaves. So I think it'll probably flower again for me towards the end of summer. That's when it normally flowers for me. I think what happened is normally I get the frost killing it right down to the ground. This year I think some of the growing points were still left unscathed, and so that meant they were able to come up and put on flowers quite early in the season. So as I say, I suspect it will continue to grow a little bit taller. You can see it's much taller than it was in spring, and lots of growing points, but because it's got lots of growing points, not one or two giant ones, it's not going to be as big as I've had it before. I've had flowers right up to around almost about 6 foot in height before. This year I think they'll stay a bit smaller because it's kind of competing with itself. We're going to have lots of flowers, I reckon, but much smaller. It's good to see it's doing well, and this shouldn't get too badly affected by the winds because it's quite a sheltered position, and I find it for me anyway, in this position, it's always been quite wind resistant. Now, I did also have a lot of canna lilies. The canna lilies, I put loads of them out, put about 10 different varieties to see which one would grow best for me. Basically, all of them did really badly and didn't really like my summers. I think it was too cool for them. And then I had one that kept coming back year after year, didn't do very well. And it was down here in the corner, but I haven't seen any sign of it at all this year coming back. So I think that's completely died now. And that was the last of my canna lilies. So I might try another canna lily again in the future, I'm not sure. If any of you guys know a really tough, hardy one that will definitely survive my winters and doesn't mind the cooler summers, let me know. But I've basically given up with the canna lilies for now. I'm going to stick with the bananas and the other plants. So that's most of the garden now talked about. I'll now want to show you the biggest plant, which is my Paulownia here. And it is really putting on a good amount of growth this year. So this here is my Paulownia tree. As you can see, it's looking quite impressive this year. It's put on a lot of growth. So previously what I've been doing with this is I've been coppicing it down near the ground level. I've been letting it grow up with lots of rapid growth and giant leaves and having it for that giant leaf effect. But last year what happened is it got ravaged by the winds around about middle of August. And then it lost all its leaves for the rest of the season, and I was a bit worried it would be quite weak because normally you'd expect it to stop growing around about September time and then use all the energy that it gets in September to kind of store for the next year. So I was a bit worried it wasn't going to do that well, so I didn't cut it back, and I also wanted to see what it would do if I didn't cut it back. So this is what it's done. It started off with that just one original shoot. It got ravaged by the winds really badly in the last update that I did. You can see a lot of the older leaves are badly torn. But because they were smaller than previous years, they didn't get as much damage as they could have had. And then for the last few weeks, because of this really lovely warm weather we've been having, it's been growing really, really well. As I say, it's the warmest summer I've really ever known. A little bit dry at times, but generally really nice and warm with occasional rainfall. So everything's done really well in the garden. But this in particular has done really well for me. You can see it's put on a huge amount of growth. So I'm quite happy with how it's doing. And I suspect we'll have lots of flower buds on here, hopefully by autumn time. It's a little unusual, Paulownias, they put all their flower buds on at the end of the growing season, but they don't actually flower till spring, and they just kind of keep all those flower buds just as in tight formation until springtime, and then the flowers open and put on a great display. And they look like foxglove flowers. So we'll see how it does. Unfortunately, this is really, really not good against the wind, so although I won't lose the main stem, I don't think, although it is actually quite a weak timber compared with most trees, it's a decent thickness, so it should be all right. But some of these side branches might get snapped, and I'm expecting most of the leaves to be completely shredded, and be surprised if there's really any leaves left on this at all by the end of the storm. So we'll see how it does. Hopefully we do have some leaves left. Losing all the leaves now in August is really not good at all for the plant. It's only just got a good canopy of leaves now, and if all the leaves get ripped off, it's not then going to be able to really produce the energy it needs for next year coming back. So we'll see how it does, but as I say, it's not looking too good at the moment with this storm coming. So that's it for this update on the tropical garden. We'll see how the storm is. Hopefully it's not too bad. If I can, I'll have done a live stream about it to show how the damage is in the garden, and I'll maybe even do an after video. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. But hopefully we'll get a good growing season for the rest of the year. My growing season normally goes until the second week of September, and I'll give you guys an update then and show you how big the garden has become by then and how tall all my banana trees have got.